through YouTube. My name is Pedro de Vasconcelos. I'm the manager of the financing facility for remittances here at the International Fund for Agricultural Development. I will be your master of ceremony today. But before we proceed with the opening session of the meeting, we would like to present this year's videos of the International Day of Family Remittances.
Every year, 200 million migrant workers, half of them women, send over $500 billion to their families back home. Through different channels, they support their 800 million family members in developing countries, more than half of them in rural places, to pay bills, put food on the table, pay for health expenses, and also to save money and invest in a better future. Today, this lifeline is under threat. As COVID-19 exposed vulnerabilities, many migrant workers have found themselves jobless or unable to earn the money so vital for their family's welfare. In many countries, access to remittance services was temporarily limited by the restrictions imposed by lockdown measures. The consequences of a sharp global reduction of family remittances to developing countries are dire. Hundreds of millions of families might not be able to reach their own daily sustainable development goals. Public authorities, remittance service providers, and the civil society need to come together to address the realities of the 1 billion people directly involved in remittances. Together, we can mitigate the impact of the current crisis on remittances. We can make remittances count more in rural areas where it is needed the most. And we can support remittance families prepare for a future beyond immediate needs. We can build resilience in times of crisis by acting as one.
Thank you. Before we begin, we kindly ask everybody not to unmute their microphones until requested. And we will use the chat room for questions when there's time to do so, and this will be announced during the sessions. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Paul Winters, Associate Vice President of the International Fund for Agricultural Development, to officially open this meeting. Paul, you have the floor.
Good morning, everyone. Excellencies, distinguished representatives, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the observance event of the International Day of Family Remittances. Antonio Guterres, the United Nations Secretary General, sent us a message in observance of the day and in support of the Family Remittances campaign launched by IFAD, Building Resilience in Times of Crisis. In his message, broadly shared today through all media, he recognizes the determination of 200 million migrants who regularly send money home, and the 800 million family members living in communities throughout the world who depend on those resources. At this time of global crisis, he appeals to people everywhere to support migrants and calls on all stakeholders to take steps to reduce remittance transfer costs, provide financial services for migrants and their families, particularly in rural areas, and promote financial inclusion for a more secure and stable future. Please join me in thanking our Secretary General for his support to the day and to the campaign. For centuries, people have been moving from rural to urban areas and across national borders in search of change for better opportunities. That's how human nature drives migration. But with migrant workers and remittances, we have another perspective on this phenomenon. Individuals leave home in order to give their families the chance to remain in their hometowns and villages. On this day, as we have been reminded by the United Nations Secretary General, we recognize the important contribution of nearly 200 million migrant workers to the economies of their host countries and the lives of the 800 million family members that the remittances support back home. Taken together, remittances are believed to directly touch the lives of 1 billion people on Earth. In 2013, during the Global Forum on Remittances, Investment and Development, stakeholders came together to propose a global recognition of the contribution of remittances to development. In 2015, IFAD's member states adopted the International Day of Family Remittances on June 16th, today. The same countries called upon the United Nations General Assembly to formally adopt the day, making it a reality on June 12th, 2018, just 2 years ago. This day of recognition and of commitment to action is extremely important because only 15 years ago, remittances were literally unaccounted for because migrant workers and their families didn't count. This is now changing as the scale and scope of remittances has become documented. The current pandemic and ensuing economic crisis have highlighted the consequences that reductions of remittances can have, particularly in developing economies where these flows count the most. Indeed, this is a serious reminder for all nations to make remittances count more. For IFAD, this represents a key priority in our efforts to support rural prosperity, as over 50% of remittances reach rural areas. IFAD is focusing its initial efforts on stimulating recovery from COVID-19, which has resulted in an overall reduction in remittance flows, including by ensuring that vulnerable people who've lost incomes have incentives to engage in agriculture, and through the launch of the dedicated fund, the Rural Poor Stimulus Facility. In addition, ongoing discussions for IFAD's 12th replenishment focus on how IFAD can further support building the resilience of vulnerable people to such shocks. Recreating employment opportunities in the wider economy are critical to create jobs for rural people and reestablish remittance flows that underpin the economies of many rural households. We fully recognize and embrace remittance families as agents of change, and will continue to create opportunities for them to invest these funds where they have the most transformative benefits. On March 19, 2020, the Secretary General called for an urgent and coordinated response from the international community to address the COVID-19 pandemic and defined remittances as a lifeline. 5 days later, the Remittance Community Task Force was launched by IFAD and 37 partner organizations from all sectors. Today, the task force has released an interim report, Blueprint for Action, aimed at providing immediate to short-term measures for a response. This blueprint is in line with the United Nations framework for the immediate socioeconomic response to COVID-19 and is in support of Objective 20 of the Global Compact for Migration for the promotion of faster, safer, and cheaper remittance transfers and financial inclusion of migrants. The need for international coordination to maintain the flow of remittances during COVID-19 crisis is also underscored by other initiatives on remittances and crisis mitigation activities, such as the Financial Action Task Force's call to facilitate integrity and security of global payment systems, the World Bank's call to action to support the remittance sector in the near and medium term, a joint call to action by Switzerland and the United Kingdom to support the continuity of remittance flows, a European Commission proposal to the G20, and the high-level event on financing for development in the era of COVID-19 and beyond that includes remittances as one of its key targets. In celebration of the International Day of Family Remittance, it's an honor to have so many key distinguished representatives join us. We have His Majesty Ambassador Pedro Grolo Villa from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Guatemala, His Excellency Teodoro Locsin Jr., Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of the Philippines, who hoped to join us but was unable to, but will be connecting through a video or be providing a video. His Excellency James Duddridge, Minister of Africa of the United Kingdom, Minister for Africa of the United Kingdom. His Excellency Ion Perju, Minister of Agriculture, Regional Development and Environment from the Republic of Moldova. And Her Excellency Ms. Vero Henitsoa Andrea Mias Arisoa, Deputy Permanent Representative, Permanent Mission of the Republic of Madagascar to the United Nations. The interventions of these distinguished representatives will be followed by 3 technical panels addressing, first, the reality of remittances families, second, the remittance market and its enabling environment, and third, the growing need for strengthening digital ecosystems, particularly in rural areas. After each panel, space will be given for questions for member state representatives and the audience following us on YouTube. We will then conclude with remarks from Mr. Huangbo, President of IFAD, who unfortunately could not make it today because, as I mentioned, our replenishment is occurring this year. And because of COVID, we had to change the dates because we can't have full day meetings, but only half day video conferences, and one of those is going on today. So he sends his apologies, but he does have a video message at the end. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to honor to give the floor to each of the distinguished panelists. So first, let's start with His Excellency Ambassador Pedro Grolo Villa. Your Excellency, please, the floor is yours.
Good morning to everyone. Mr. Paul Winters, Associate Vice President, International Fund for Agricultural Development. Mr. Antonio Vitorino, General Director of the International Organization for Migration and Coordinator of the UN Network on Migration. Mr. Gilbert Umbo, President of the International Fund for Agricultural Development. Excellencies, the Ministers of States of Philippines, Algeria, Madagascar, and Moldova, distinguished representatives of international organizations and the private sector. Guatemala would like to thank the International Fund for Agricultural Development and our co-sponsors, Madagascar, the Philippines, and Moldova, for convening this high-level meeting on remittances with a focus on resilience in times of crisis, such as the COVID-19 pandemic. I am very pleased to share some remarks with you today as we mark the International Day for Family Remittances. Remittances are a vehicle for migrant workers to provide a more sound life to their families back in their countries of origin. Their impact is not only economic, they also impact into a more significant aspects of family lives. It may signify a new roof or a new house, the opportunity to go to school or university, to have better food, and to have access to health services that otherwise are difficult to get. We can argue that migration flows are the human face of globalization, and remittances have become an untold bond between those people living and working in foreign countries, helping perhaps inadvertently to foster development and social well-being for their communities back home. Guatemala is a country of origin, transit, destination, and return of migrants. Due to its geographic location, this trend has always been part of our social dynamic and history. For that reason, the new administration led by President Dr. Alejandro Yamatei has focused his efforts on working towards implementing strategies and alliances that seek the respect of migrants, human rights in line with the general government plan. Moreover, now as we face the challenges arising from COVID-19. Currently, migration and development have grown into more interdependent concepts, given the undeniable impact of migration on the economic output in countries of destination, but also in the development of countries of origin. Migration have impacts on poverty reduction and on fostering employment. Remittances, on the other hand, are an important growing source of foreign funds for many development countries. At present, these flows are more than double the official and received by developing countries. It is undeniable that migration and the remittances can greatly contribute to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. For Guatemala, remittances are crucial to the economic growth as they represent up to 30.8% of our gross domestic products. In 19, their importance and impact are making governments to steer their efforts into a more comprehensive approach in order to grasp the multiplier effects of remittances in their socio-economic plans and programs. Guatemala is developing a scheme through which migrant workers are the center of all endeavors. We have launched an initiative along with the Minister of Labor that aims to foster temporary workers programs in other nations, which we believe will help those countries that need qualified labor force in areas such as agricultural, construction, and tourism industries, among others. We understand the significance of having a considerable Guatemalan diaspora in certain countries and the importance of the remittances, noting that they have an special acute beneficial impacts in rural areas, where levels of poverty and malnutrition are the highest. The compounded effects of the pandemic on food security, nutrition, and related issues are serious, which is why we remain deeply concerned about the ongoing situation. We must strive to lower the remittances transaction cost to 3% or less. In line with the 2013 Agenda for Sustainable Development, we must also expend deeper efforts to provide financial literacy programs and increase access to financial technologies. In this context, remittances are an important source of foreign currency reserves in the economies of receiving countries and play a very positive role in improving the living standards of communities. In the case of Guatemala, remittances are key to foster economic development. Nevertheless, this positive impact can be undermined from an unexpected phenomenon such as COVID-19. All of our efforts should be geared toward protecting migrants, guaranteeing their rights, and making the remittances more productive through the generations of investment programs and through financial education initiatives that could translate into enhanced community development efforts. COVID-19 hinders such efforts, but we are confident that alongside with the private sector and social civil society, we can become more resilient to the harmful effects of this pandemic. For all these reasons, we appreciate the work done by the Remittances Community Task Force, and we are still in process of reviewing their recommendations to see where we can better focus our efforts. Dear friends and colleagues, I cannot overstate the importance of these issues for my country and how engaged and committed we are to improve global policy coherence that will contribute increasing resilience in order to prepare for unforeseen future crises. Migrants' contribution to economic growth is essential. My government recognizes the importance of implementing a financial education strategy that promotes savings and productive investments, contributing for the sustainability of the income of beneficiary of families' remittances. Therefore, we must continue to join efforts and avoiding fragmenting and correcting a coherent and effective global multilateral response to the pandemic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency, on behalf of Guatemala. Now we'll move to the video that we have from the Minister of Foreign Affairs from the Philippines, Teodoro Lacson.
It is my pleasure to be here today to commemorate the International Day of Family Remittances. The theme answers the long and crying need. Supporting remittance, families build resilience in times of crisis. I thank our friends and partners in this endeavor, Guatemala, Madagascar, Moldova, and IFAD, as well as the wider network that advocates for migrants, including the Remittance Community Task Force. My country, the Philippines, along with Algeria, Guatemala, and Madagascar, led the adoption of the landmark resolution declaring June 16 as the International Day of Family Remittances. The resolution recognizes the link between remittances and sustainable development. It acknowledges the fundamental contribution of migrant workers to the well-being of their families and communities of origin. It is how a country, unable to take care of its people as decency demands, is able to cope. Many of its people take themselves out of their country's hands by taking care of themselves abroad. But this never takes away a country's responsibility to protect its people wherever in the world they bravely venture for work and wages. It is the least a country can do in return. I introduced the resolution in the General Assembly and distinctly remember that the resolution was adopted on 12 June 2018, our Independence Day, a fitting tribute to the hard work and sacrifices of our overseas Filipino workers who use remittances to improve the lives of their families and to create a future for their children back home. The pain of separation perhaps thereby ameliorated. Pursuant to our shared commitment to leave no one behind and reach out first to those farthest behind in realizing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, our event today is made more significant against the backdrop of the COVID-19 pandemic and its multi-dimensional impact on around 272 million international migrants globally. We thus welcome the policy brief of the Secretary General on COVID-19 and people on the move, highlighting the vulnerabilities and risks faced by migrants in this crisis. We strongly support the brief's 4 basic tenets. 1. Exclusion is costly in the long run, whereas inclusion pays off in the short and long, if I might add. The response to COVID-19 and protecting human rights are not mutually exclusive. And if I might add, failure to protect human rights in this situation is never justified and always self-condemning and self-destructive. 3. No one is safe until everyone is safe. 4. People on the move are part of the solution, as I have shown. We note with concern that this policy brief reveals that COVID-19 is projected to result in a decline in remittances of about $109 billion, causing hardships to over 800 million people in low and middle-income countries that are heavily dependent on them. Further, as a call for solidarity so no one is left behind in these worst times, the Philippines initiated and with allies in the cause facilitated the joint statement on the impact of COVID-19 on migrants. The statement was signed by 103 member states across the regions. In transmitting the joint statement to the Secretary General, we highlighted our conviction that the millions of migrants around the world today are agents of sustainable development and instrumental to our collective recovery. We underline that we count on the continued support of the Secretary General in ensuring the protection of the rights of migrants and in mitigating the impacts of the pandemic on migrants globally. According to World Bank data, the Philippines is the 4th largest recipient of remittances globally. In 2019, remittances accounted for 9.8% of the country's GDP. 75% of remittance money is spent to support household consumption, which includes essential goods such as food, education, and healthcare. Large flows of the remittances come from the US, Europe, and the Middle East, collectively accounting for 70% of all remittances. Remittances from overseas Filipino workers, land-based, sea-based, reached $33.9 billion in 2019. This makes remittances one of the biggest foreign exchange earners after exports, supporting the Philippine peso and driving consumption. A Fitch report in May 2020 projects that the country will experience a drop in remittances as more overseas Filipinos are displaced and repatriated with the uncertain prospects abroad. They will be back in the jobless situations from which they fled. About 300,000 to 400,000 overseas Filipinos workers may be affected by the pandemic, with total repatriates to reach 70,000 by the end of June 2020. Our advocacy for keeping the continuing flow of remittances is focused on maximizing the benefits to senders and receivers of remittances. As a critical link to the remittance chain, remittance service providers were classified by the Philippine government as essential services, allowed to operate even during lockdown. The central bank waived its fees and charges for financial institutions offering digital channels for social benefit transfers and remittances. We also advocate for lowering remittance costs, especially by deploying digital technology. The Philippine government pre-pandemic jump-started reforms in digital banking to lower remittance costs. Despite the high levels of remittance costs globally, the World Bank said that the Philippines is an exception with its low remittance fees compared to other East Asian and Pacific countries. In this event, we look forward to hearing other experiences and recommendations to promote better policies in favor of remittance senders and receivers everywhere towards a more resilient remittance industry. Thank you, and I wish all of us a meaningful International Day of Family Remittances.
Thank you. Let's quickly go to His Excellency James Duddridge, the Minister for Africa of the United Kingdom. I know he has another engagement, so please, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much. I'm the Minister for Africa, James Duddridge. I've been a politician for 15 years. Before that, I did 10 years as a banker, in part in Africa. So know what the challenges and opportunities are of remittances particularly. So it's a pleasure to be here on International Day of Family Remittances. And I'd like to make a few remarks about remittances, particularly in the context of the current crisis. The coronavirus outbreak clearly is a global health crisis, but also is a humanitarian crisis and really raises the risk of being a protracted economic crisis. And we need a fully coordinated international response. That's why the UK government's invested 250 million in the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, which is looking for a vaccine solution. We're strengthening fragile health systems, which is dealing with the health issues. But on the economic side, working together with the G20 and Paris Club, we announced a commitment to suspend £12 billion of debt servicing payments up to 2020. Now, these will make a significant contribution, but by far and away, the largest source of external funding to low and middle income countries is remittances, which is why we are talking about it today. Not only are they important in terms of their size, but monies are provided directly to households who use them to purchase essential foods, healthcare, and education. And what we're seeing at the moment is a fall in remittances of 20–25% in some cases, although the amounts differ depending on countries. And these reductions can have a massive impact on those specific households. That's why the UK government, alongside the Swiss government and with the support of the World Bank and others, launched a global call to action on remittances last month. The call to action also demonstrates our commitment to the Global Compact for migration, but also the Sustainable Development Goals. We're pleased to welcome the participation of those that have joined the call since the launch, and we hope many, many more countries and stakeholders will come forward over the coming weeks and months to endorse the call for action and its mission to keep remittances flowing. However, action to keep remittances flowing during the crisis is only part of the story. We need to improve access and get the costs of remittances down. This will require a global coordinated response, both from governments private sector and international organisation. I'm therefore pleased to announce that UK has been able to cooperate closely with partners, not only for the call to action, but also on the Remittances Communities Task Force. And I thank them for the publication of their blueprint for the coalition earlier. I'd also like to thank the International Fund for Agricultural Development and other members of the task force for their work. I'd like to finish on two interrelated points. Firstly, the intermediate goal for the call to action and the Remittance Community Task Force is to generate momentum effectively for increasing remittance flows during the crisis. But we need to take this COVID crisis as an opportunity to bring about systemic change to deliver on the longer term goals of remittances, in particular the SDG to target to bring down the cost of remittances to below 3% by 2030 from the current global average of almost 7%. That's an outrageously large sum of money that in any other context we wouldn't allow to be so high. And secondly, the call to action emphasises the important role that digital payments and technology play in keeping remittances flowing in the crisis. And I'm looking forward to getting a readout of the digitalisation session later on in this event. We've seen an increased reliance on digital services around the globe in the context of the pandemic, where lockdowns have restricted physical locations and the ability of physical cash as government have tried to mitigate against the spread of COVID through the proximity of exchanges of physical banknotes and coins. We should use this faster adoption of digital services to support the flows during the crisis and bringing down the overall cost. As Amazon has transformed our shopping, Spotify and iTunes has transformed our music, Apple has transformed our mobile technology, perhaps we need a new remittance company to transform well beyond the 3% and down at the 1%. But perhaps that's a challenge for the private sector rather than the public sector. But I think collectively we can and we should do better, and the prize for getting that right will be enormous. And finally, we must ensure that in everything we do, secure, accessible, affordable remittance services are available to all, regardless of where they reside around the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we'll move on to Ian Purju, the Minister of Agriculture, Regional Development and Environment of the Republic of Moldova. Your Excellency, please.
Thank you. Good day, everybody. Mr. Co-Chair, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to take part in this important dialogue which tackles the issue of immigration and its potential for transformation and development with focus on rural areas. The epidemiological crisis related to the new coronavirus has brought with its series of social challenges for the Republic of Moldova. In addition to the issue related to the uncertain situation of private sector employees, the sustainability of small and medium-sized enterprises, but also the ability of the medical system to respond to the growing number of COVID-19 infections, government authorities do their best to manage the impact of the crisis in Moldovan immigrants. The Republic of Moldova is affected by the double impact of migration. On the one hand, the positive social economic effects determined mostly by remittances, and on the other hand, those of social demographic nature that led to the deterioration of the human capital in our country. The restoration of migration and the remittances parameters will take several years and will depend on the speed of the recovery of the world economy after the crisis caused by spread of the COVID-19 infection. The year 2020 will be marked by a reduction of the remittances, as in other countries, of course. In the condition of a global recession, it becomes certain that the economy of the Republic of Moldova will be affected not only by internal factors, but also by the situation in countries such as Romania, Germany, Italy, Turkey, or Russia. Remittances could decline with the return to Moldova of more migrants from the European Union, Russia, or Israel, or in the geographical structure of remittances transferred from Russia, Israel, and Italy predominate, with 3 countries account for about 50% of the total volume of transfers. Over the past 2 decades, remittances have been an important source of household income in Moldova. It is clear that COVID-19 can have a significant impact on migration and remittances. Currently, it is too early to estimate what volume of remittances will be lost in 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. At the same time, taking into account the severity of the negative effect generated by COVID-19 in Italy, for example, and in Russian Federation, countries with an impressive share of the total volume of remittances, we anticipate that the volume of money transfers to Republic of Moldova will support a sharp decrease of at least 20–30% in this year. The Moldovan government has taken steps to make immigration policy a priority and has structures in place to facilitate these movements. According to this subject of our discussion, I would like to focus further on, in my intervention, on some good practice at the national level in attracting remittances and migrants investment in rural areas. In this regard, formal remittances scams have been established through bank transfer and post office, and the government is working towards making such transfers more affordable. For example, a pilot agreement signed by Moldova government and Italy National Post Office, launched in 2014, reduced remittance costs significantly. Also, the government of Moldova is implementing the PARE 1+1 program, which aims to attract the remittances of Moldova migrants into the national economy. The program specifically targets migrant workers and their first-degree relatives who want to launch or develop their business in the Republic of Moldova. Since its inception in 2010, the program has facilitated access to finance for more than 1,136 Moldovan enterprises. Also, since 2015, with the support of UNDP and the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation, the Migration and Local Development Project has been implemented in our country, aimed to mobilize migrants' resources for a sustainable local development. They have made concrete efforts to turn migration from a problem into an opportunity at the local level by consulting and involving migrants as development partners. 38 mayors of Moldova successfully implemented the new model and created the first 38 local associations in the country, and other more than 100 localities initiated the replication of this unique and efficient experience. For the first time in the country, there has been a massive mobilization of migrants' investments to improve the infrastructure in their communities or region. Recently, a new IDFR grant project was launched aiming to support startups in agriculture and the rural area, managed by young people and women. The grants for the launching and development of business deployed from remittances will be provided to young entrepreneurship. According to World Bank estimation, the Republic of Moldova takes the 12th place concerning the share of remittance in GDP, which in 2019 was 16.3%. The importance of remittances for the national economy is very important and is manifested in the following aspects. It generates the increasing in gross domestic product. The acceleration of private consumption determines the intensification of imports and some economic activities such as retail trade, transport and communication, real estate transaction, financial activities, health service, etc. A real appreciation of the national currency. labor market is significantly affected. There is a reduction of employment, and in some sectors of the economy, there is shortage, deficit of specialists, especially in the field of construction, manufacturing industry, but in the last time, even in agriculture sector. Overall, the country's dependence of external factors is increasing, which impose the need to create its own resources for economic growth. In conclusion, the government of Republic of Moldova considers migrants' investments an important potential for sustainable development of rural area, and will provide specific support for sustainable reintegration of migrants at home. Or the actual situation can turn into an opportunity, given that the labor force is an important source for the country's economy. All sort policies to frame this available labor force will create opportunities for consolidating and developing the real sector, and as a result, for increasing the country's economic potential with a decrease of the dependence for external factors. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Now we'll move to Her Excellency Ms. Vero Henningsoa Andrea Miela Soa. Sorry, I'm sure I'm not getting your name perfectly right. The Deputy Permanent Representative for the Permanent Mission of the Republic of Madagascar. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Honorable Ministers, distinguished panelists, distinguished delegates, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, to begin with, I'd like to thank the I'd like to thank the team who helped organize this very important meeting, as well as those who gave their time today to honor this event. In these difficult times of COVID-19 pandemic, Madagascar would like to call on all of us to explore together more than ever, to mobilize further and stimulate actions in line with the social and economic dimension of money transfers to the family of origin. Hence, our eagerness to be one of the co-leaders of the resolution 72/281, the origin of the International Day of Family Remittances, celebrated since then on June 16th at the United Nations. The COVID-19 crisis has negatively impacted the remittances inflows in receiving countries. Furthermore, this year, precisely last week, 176 Malagasy women migrant workers were repatriated from Kuwait. This implies that at least 176 remittances flows have stopped. In other words, the COVID-19 pandemic reaches each part of family life beyond the disease itself. Consequently, resilience aspects are crucial and need to be handled in a timely manner. Apart from migrant workers, the Malagasy diaspora is one of the main providers of funds to Madagascar. In 2017, the amount of transfers was $427 million US. The funds transferred by the diaspora benefits the national economy and contribute to the development of the country. Following its development policies and the implementation of the Global Forum on Migration and Development's recommendations, the government of Madagascar considered its diaspora as a development lever in order to allow Malagasy nationals abroad to play a key role in economic development and transform brain drain into brain gain. Distinguished delegates, referring to the theme of today's event, I believe that remittances are relevant for a social and economic inclusion of migrant workers and their families, most of whom are from rural communities. Since the adoption of the resolution in 2018, Madagascar had made further steps to offer an environment that allows a faster, safer, and cheaper remittances. And I'm grateful for the remarkable collaboration between the government, the private sector, the rural families, and the international partners, such as the International Fund for Agricultural Development, IFAD, the World Bank, and the United Nations Capital Development Funds, the International Fund, Organization for Migration, to name a few. Concretely, the postal service in Madagascar, which is named the Posta Malagasy, with its 255 branches across the country, is our major player in the financial sector. In partnership with the IFAD, under the African Postal Financial Services Initiative, the Malagasy Postal Office has enlarged its services. For instance, delivery of remittances in rural areas has been broadened, and access to financial services for rural population has notably increased. Moreover, transfers attest some significant reduction in costs and transaction times. Otherwise, in Madagascar, families use mostly the Western Union, MoneyGram, World Remit, and Raya services through commercial banks. In terms of digital financial services, mobile banking operators are more than 30 financial institutions cover the local market. However, the country faces a shortage of operating agents, particularly in suburban areas, while liquidity issues also arise often. Besides, agents have to tackle challenges, namely low mobile telephony penetration rates, which is around 40%, electricity problems, and insufficient network coverage, especially in remote zones where digital financial services would have brought more added values in a safe and convenient way. In recent years, legal instruments, regulatory mechanisms, and structures have been put in place. And as a result, laws have been adopted and structures have been created or progressively redesigned to deal with digital financial services, cyber criminality prevention and protection, and control of risk of fraud. Distinguished delegates, finally, according to the World Bank database, remittances represents $433 million in 2019, which is a significant share when it comes to development contributions and resources mobilization. As lessons learned from these last months of COVID-19 crisis, remittances service providers should be considered as essential services. Indeed, sending money to those who need the most should be permitted beyond lockdown hours, as remittances covers generally the receiver's fundamental human needs as food, education, and healthcare. So to conclude, I would like to highlight that while access to remittance services should be broadly promoted, especially in poor rural areas, promotion of digital literacy should be also part of any policy related to remittances in order to leave no one behind. Thank you for your attention and wish you all a happy day of family remittances.
Thank you, Your Excellency, and thanks all Your Excellencies for the very interesting interventions. It's interesting to hear the different situations across countries, but also just to note many of the similar issues that are seen in these different countries, which is part of why it's good to have these kind of meetings where we're all discussing them and try to learn from each other. With that, we'll close this session and I'll hand it over to Pedro, who will move forward into the next session. Pedro, please.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you all for these remarks. It's really well appreciated. The following us here on on Zoom as well on YouTube. There's a lot of remarks. So again, thank you for this. We're a little bit behind, so I'm going to try to make it short as we go into the next panel. So I would like to take this opportunity is to welcome Marie-Chantal Ouitonze. She's the president of the African Diaspora Network in Europe, ADNE. Marina Manke, head of Labor Mobility and Human Development Division of the International Organization for Migration, IOM, as well as Fernando Ontiveros is the General Manager, Development Promotion Fund, Spanish Agency for Cooperation International Development, IACID. The way that we have the panels are among, actually you're going to witness a discussion among experts that already know themselves, because they're all being part of this Remittances Community Task Force that was created since March 24th. We all got together for the simple reason that there was a lot of issues. There was a lot of problems in understanding what's happening in data. We knew some of the issues on one side, but a lot remained to be assessed. And this task force got together to try to find out and identify ways to mitigate some of the impact of this crisis. The release that was mentioned, the release of the report that was mentioned early on, is an interim product of this exercise among now 38 members of this task force. And the panels today will try to bring the three issues or have more of a 360 view. One, the next one on the reality of 1 billion people, migrants and their families. This will be followed by the market issues, and then of course the mechanism, and particularly the one on digitalization. So without further ado, I would like to start with the first panel, Remittance Families in Times of Crisis. We often forget the reality. We get bogged down into the billions and billions that this send, but everything that matters is the $200, $300 for a family. And for many during this crisis, what we've seen is that for many of this, many migrants, the issue has been either being able to send or not remittances. We know that the lockdowns have affected many migrants that either saw themselves unemployed or maintaining services that were deemed essential, and that the equation has been ruthless for many families back home. Either they could receive remittances because the migrants had some savings, either they could not. And this is the first time that the crisis has been felt simultaneously on both sides because of the lockdowns and because both family members on the sending and receiving side were targeted. So the panel today and the following will try to bring this to bear. So I would like us to bring the perspective from the migrants, and for this I think Marie-Chantal, the president of the African Diaspora Network in Europe, could enlighten us more about the reality that many migrants have seen. So Marie-Chantal, without further ado, I'll give you the floor.
Good afternoon and good evening if you are following us from another area than Brussels. And thank you, Pedro, for giving me the floor. First and foremost, happy International Day for Family Remittances. I would like to start by declaring that remittances are more than just money. The 100, 200 or 500 euros sent monthly embody an act of solidarity and sacrifice from the diaspora and migrant workers toward their families and the global recipient community to improve their livelihood. The COVID-19, as the previous speakers already highlighted, presented an unequaled threat to this solidarity. Compared to other crises such as the 2008 financial crisis and 2014 Ebola pandemic, where remittances were relatively resilient, the COVID-19 pandemic hit hard on remittances corridor, due to the lockdown measures implemented in host countries and home countries. So as you specified in the beginning, we have many panelists, and I will be focusing on the sending community to reflect how the COVID-19 is affecting the flow of remittances. In most cases, diaspora and migrant workers are already affected by work discrimination, which makes them occupy employment in less secured sectors where jobs cannot be done remotely, such as construction, hospitality, healthcare, tourism, food, agribusiness, transport, domestic care, etc. Some, mainly the newcomers, are working in the informal sector and living in poor conditions where social distancing cannot be easily applied. And the vast majority work part-time or are self-employed. So this situation reduces their chances to access employment benefits and adequate social protection. And many of migrant workers and diaspora died to their work condition are excluded from the government stimulus. The reduction of the income is for everyone directly affects their savings, therefore also affect the amount they can send home. And among the sending community, beside the categories of newcomers versus ancient one, there are also the very critical conditions of women. Women are the most affected. They represent 50% of the 200 million migrant and diaspora who send man home. And at all levels, they are hit by the negative fallout from the crisis. Migrant women represent 70% of migrant working in the social and healthcare. And apart from their direct exposure to the pandemic, the closure of schools also has consequences in their organizations, and as they have to take care of children and take care of their home while they fight to cover their needs and the ones of their families. So it is really very important on this day to recall the importance for diaspora and migrant workers to benefit from the macro solidarity that are being organized at national level and international level to sustain the flows of remittances and the impact on development. This will include, for instance, the promoting the universal health coverage to provide health insurance for all, and reduce the sanitary effects of the pandemic to migrant workers. Providing also temporary permits and reducing payment for public services and rent payments to ensure migrants with limited means a shelter against the COVID-19. Some countries like Portugal did this, and I applaud such initiatives. Besides the living and working conditions, the crisis also affected remittances costs, due to the limitation of mobility, offering limited choice for workers' services. Some operators also took the opportunity of this crisis to increase their costs, which is not a good thing. So it is very important to encourage the competition and collaboration by removing entry barriers into the money transfer operators and enhance the collaboration between operators, financial institutions, and telecommunication companies to reduce the cost of remittances.
Marie-Chantal, I will ask you to conclude, please.
Yes, of course, I'm concluding. One thing also that is needed is the support to startups that are creating innovative and digital solutions. So my colleague will probably touch base to this aspect later. I stop here and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Marie-Chantal, for this. As you know, there's been a lot addressed and done through over the last month. The report that we mentioned has some of that. It was still an interim report. The next one would include a lot more about what Marie-Chantal has been including, because a lot of information has been gathered and we believe deemed to be shared as well. So thank you so much. You also made a good transition, I think, to what Marina Manke from IOM could bring us from the reality also of the remittance families in the field. So I would like to give the floor to Marina for her address, and please, for all the speakers as well, when you hear the little sound that you heard before, is when your time is due. You have 15 seconds to try to finalize, so we can keep time today. Marina, you have the floor.
Thank you, Pedro. I'll try to do my best. I was planning to spend 5 minutes, but let me try to speed up even further. Understanding that we are a little bit behind the schedule, it's my pleasure to join today's discussion and celebration or observance of the International Day of Family Remittances. As you know, we've been joining our partners on marking that important 16th of June day every year in the last few years. Unfortunately, this year's observance is darkened by the ongoing COVID pandemic and its impact on, indeed, as you said, Pedro, migrants, on the communities, on countries. A lot has been mentioned right now already during today's interventions of different speakers. And I'm actually joining this webinar right now following the call to action webinar, where also we are partnering with different cluster of stakeholders, but again, reinforcing the importance of addressing the immediate needs of our beneficiaries of migrants communities, which are right now losing jobs, right now, indeed, as you said, in a situation of trying to see how to save, how to cut costs. Our organization has been among the first responders to crisis. We are both within the development part of the United Nations humanitarian sector, work with WHO on looking at how to support communities and migrants with addressing most humanitarian needs, like, for instance, also engaging in construction of health facilities, conducting testings, but also, of course, because of our presence on the ground, talking to migrants and their families and the communities. We have recently calculated, I think we managed to engage with 1.2 million persons on COVID-19 related messages. In addition to working directly with communities and migrants, of course, as I mentioned, we support engagement with partners, with governments all over the world. And of course, our role as a coordinator of the United Network for Migration is crucial. Today, we are releasing a very large package of different materials, recommendations. Together with IFAD, we worked with other UN partners and prepared a policy brief of the United Nations Network on Migration. So there's a lot of different ideas, recommendations being put together. Some of more political level, some of very technical. So from our side, what becomes very crucial as we move forward again, because we are so much driven to by the impact on the ground, is really try to be very tangible and measuring the impact of what exactly we are implementing and how we can scale up some of the initiatives. So, of course, digitalization is a very important area. There will be a follow-up session on that. We'll continue working on this. As you know, we have a smartphone application, MIGAP, and we are going to continue rolling it out as an opportunity for both already sharing a real-time cost comparison within specific corridors, but also engaging in advocacy with migrants. We're also releasing a very interesting study in Bangladesh, where we tried to compare the situation between family migrants and specifically linked to them borrowing funding and money before migration to finance the cost of it. And of course, what we are witnessing, the COVID-19 is of course bringing specific vulnerabilities and challenges related to remittances, but it also exposing a lot of inconsistencies and intransparency of the market, of the situation which already existed before. Just to reconfirm again from my side, on behalf of our organization, readiness to support, to work together, and both teams based in Geneva, in the regional offices, but of course our colleagues with whom you are already engaged at the country level. So looking forward to the continuation of this discussion. Thank you, Pedro, over.
Thank you, Marina. Indeed, the presence in the field, I think, is what has been shown. What I believe, what the attention globally has been really pushed, or has been highlighting the reality in sending countries. Not much has been said on the receiving countries, on the 800 million, on what remittances mean for them. Now people don't say that it's for consumption anymore. We say that it is for achieving their daily goals or their own sustainable development goals. What many fail sometimes to still see is that this on average represents 60% of their income, and as you know very well, in many cases is actually 80 or plus. So having the reduction of remittances of 20% globally doesn't mean that they receive 20 euros less. That means that either received it, either or not. And this is why also, IFAD, we're looking at this from a perspective of what does it mean at the family level. And we are very concerned about the risk also of food insecurity that this is generating. Many were not able to buy the seeds. And this is why it's so important. Moreover, the communities around them that did not receive these remittances directly are also suffering from this. And this is why what we see not being a V-shaped recovery has really put some issues that need to be addressed, and the development impact of remittances. And for this, I would like Fernando Jimenez Ontiveros, who's I often call him as one of the fathers of remittances, because he's been at working at this from his past life in other IFIs, as developing programs linked to development on remittances and the benefits of linking this with financial products, financial inclusion, basically linking remittances to development. So I would like Fernandez to give you the floor and maybe enlighten us a bit more on the consequences that remittances not reaching the families right now can have at their family level, but also in the communities where they live, and where is the missing development opportunity. Fernando? If you're talking, you're unmuted, I believe.
You hear me?
Now we do. There you go.
Okay. Well, let me start by thanking Pedro de Vasconcelos and IFAD for this invitation to the international.
You need to increase your volume, I think, Fernando. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Okay. This doesn't count. What's the level now? Good.
More or less. You're a little bit lower.
Lower. I have to put it lower. Hello, Pedro.
You're too low.
I'm too low.
We have increasing, otherwise we will get closer to the. We'll try to put the volume up from our end.
I'm afraid this is as much as I can go. I don't know if it's enough. You hear me?
Go ahead.
Okay. So again, I wanted to thank you and IFAD for this invitation. It is really indeed a pleasure and an honor to join all of you with some ideas in the 4 minutes, a little less now, that I've been assigned. I also want to stress that we will be joining the task force, that it is even more needed than ever. So congratulations on this initiative. After listening to so many distinguished colleagues, it is hard to come up with very radically new ideas. So let me, at least from a receiving perspective, try to highlight some points that are very close to my heart and my experience. First of all, I wanted to share the importance and the priority that the Spanish government assigns to the role of remittances as an international development, and also the dramatic implications of COVID-19 in this time of crisis. I don't have to remind you that in Spain, we know we're very familiar with this phenomenon of remittances, both from sending and receiving times, which also has led, I believe, to a wave of solidarity. As many Spaniards were well received some 30 years ago abroad, and now it's time for us, in a way, to pay back and also to benefit from these vibrant communities that are reaching Europe now. So we approach the remittances with a profound respect. As we always say, Pedro, it is their money. And any well-intended initiative to try and figure out what they should be using the money for, even if it's for the greater good, such as the coined concept of productive investment, we see that with a lot of precaution, because I believe that the role of public institutions such as IFAD or ourselves or IOM and the rest is approach this by empowering the transnational family so that they can make better informed decisions about their life. There's, as you know, a tremendous gender component that we have to consider when we study the remittances. As the UN Secretary said, really remittances are the lifeline of migration or the blood of migration. Behind remittances, there are always incredible stories. So we should approach them in order to see how can we help them in the current circumstances. I want to stress the dilemma that you have already mentioned alluded to, of whether to reduce having to reduce the remittances flows in order to have a caution given the precarious nature of their jobs back in Europe. So we are, I think we want to approach these remittances, as we discussed in some other time, with 3 R's: response, recovery, and resilience. On the one hand, clearly we need to keep the channels open and to provide enough liquidity so that the migrants' relatives, the people, the micro entrepreneurs, the informal economy, the most vulnerable population who don't have now a job, who are not, because of their restrictions, who can barely pay back the microcredits to the local financial institutions, we need to act, I believe, by a combination as a response of fast disbursing liquidity to save these MFIs and prevent them from really insolvency, and also to help postponing certain payments of these MFIs. But the second part is recovery and resilience. We need to work together with the remittance colonies, with the groups of migrants in Europe, understand better their project and help them to really prepare a business plan, find suitable partners, help them how to invest part of the migrant savings in a safe way, help design financial products such as everything that starts with micro pensions, seed financing, microinsurance, etc., and to further promote financial inclusion. In this endeavor, we are not alone. We are working very closely with IFAD, and I want to express my gratitude for you as a technical advisor, and also with our colleagues of CDP. Just to cite an example, the Commission is supporting us on a very ambitious program by the name of Inclusify that wants to promote the 3 R's: response through short-term liquidity, but also moving forward to be able to identify new models of partnerships, new ways of using the promise of the new technologies to really bridge the information gap and promote business that are sustainable, so that the diaspora continues to be an element of modernization, both in Europe and in their countries of origin. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Fernando, for this. I think you summarized very well the aftermath of a remittances when it is received. It's there where the real potential is. We talked a lot about the potential that it has depending on how it is channeled, if it is cash to cash or if it transitions through a financial institution or through a mobile wallet that offers other options. But it's on also, once it's getting the options, the financial options or the financial democracy that it can bring to remittance families, where its real potential for development is there. And it belongs only to them. It is not for everybody to choose. What migrants need, I think, and their families is more options to use their funds, not to tell them how to use it, but to teach them in some case. And I think you illustrate that very, very well. And on the programs that, of course, that Spain is supporting, many of them also with IFAD in testing these models, what works? Can we link savings, credit, insurance to remittances and demonstrate this not only with one family, but by the hundreds of thousands, by the millions, and therefore basically change a new trend and hopefully inspire the private sector as to know that there's a market out there. So thank you so much for this. I'm following also on YouTube some of the questions that we are seeing, and the point was this: financial inclusion. But towards addressing financial literacy is the key aspect that is needed for both migrants and their families. And I think in our messages here, we've been coherent on that. For the sake of time and not trying to cut on my other colleagues, since we're already 15 minutes later, I will give the floor, if it's okay, to the next panel, which is the remittance market and enabling environment, a blueprint for action. That's been the whole or most of the discussion lately, as to know how the market has been affected by this and what are the enabling environment, the regulatory issues around this. So moderator would be Arish Natarajan, the lead financial sector specialist, financial competitiveness and innovation of the World Bank. Arish, I'm not sure. I was told that it was some issues. Arish, can you confirm that if you're here, or otherwise colleague Oya or Emmett? Do we have our colleagues from the World Bank?
The other working group. So I think that would be, I think you could sort of divide it between the two of you, and if you like, you could focus on the recruitment costs work, and then we can touch on like work on demand, and then maybe both of you can come.
We can barely. I don't know.
Are you able to hear me?
Oh, there you go, Arish. Here you are. Perfect. You have the floor.
Okay, no, I was connecting through my mobile phone and I was trying to figure out the Zoom controls. So I'm not sure they're able to see me. So thank you, Pedro, for setting this up, and thank you for the opportunity to present our perspectives. And as very clearly as some of the previous panelists mentioned, I think there is a two-pronged challenge as I see it. On the one hand, we have to keep the existing remittances services operational and available. And on the other side, I think we also need to see how we can use this opportunity to also facilitate and enable a shift to digital. Fernando talked about the 3 Rs, and I would encourage him to perhaps consider another R, which is about reimagining the remittances markets and how this opportunity afforded by the crisis could potentially kind of create an opportunity for doing that. In the Remittance Community Task Force, the Enabling Environment Working Group, we had discussed a number of topics, and that is reflected in the interim document. I just want to flag a few of them, and then I would request my co-panelists to kind of elaborate on them. The first one is about the need to helping address the operational disruptions and support the impacted providers, and in some sense, basically ensure that the market continues to function. The second area is about, given the new circumstances, I think this calls for a shift to digital in some sense, and how do we create a policy and regulatory environment which can enable and foster that. And that would start perhaps with leveraging the full flexibility which is there in the international regulations related to opening accounts and conducting remittance transactions remotely, looking at integration with the different domestic payment infrastructures and the cross-border payment service providers, entry of new service providers and new models, and then also transparency, consumer protection, and as you also mentioned, Pedro, in terms of awareness and transparency and digital awareness and literacy. I would like to request my colleague Dilip Ratha or Sonia Plaza to also talk a little bit about the broader policy environment related to migration, and then how sending countries and receiving countries could help migrants. That is also an important point, not just about the flow of remittances. Dilip, if you're connected, just 2-3 minutes, please.
Yes, Harish, thank you. If you cannot hear me, you
we can hear you well.
But
we can.
Very good.
We hear you.
Thank you. So good morning, good afternoon to everyone. Just a couple of points more about the migration side of story and the development impacts. But I also wanted to point out or reiterate a couple of data points. Last year, 2019, was actually a record year, a milestone for remittances, when remittances to low and middle income countries reached $554 billion, and they overtook foreign direct investment flows. That was remarkable. And we know that remittances serve as a financial lifeline to poor families. They also act like an insurance during difficult times, because migrants send more money home during a natural disaster or a pandemic. And the current crisis is actually breaking that lifeline, is rupturing that lifeline, which means that a large number of people are likely to fall back into poverty, and issues like food insecurity that we thought were in the past actually are resurfacing again. One thing that has happened with the crisis, with the lockdowns, a travel ban, social distancing, is that many migrants have lost jobs. Almost all have suffered losses. Many are stranded. They cannot go back home. And they are in actually cities. They're concentrated in urban economic centers. And that poses all sorts of risks to the migrants themselves, obviously, their families back home, because they cannot send money home, or if they go back, they're also not even that welcome because of the fear of contagion. But they're also a risk in cities like, let's say, London or Paris or Rome or Delhi or Johannesburg, where probably 25% or 30% or 40% of the workforce is made up of migrants. In those places, in urban economic centers, the concentration of migrants who are not, who do not have access to healthcare, who do not have access to proper hygiene, that's a risk as well during the current pandemic. So, there is the second dimension from this, and that is about the sectoral movements. During the past global financial crisis, migrants were, let's say during the global financial crisis of 2009, migrants were in construction sector, and that was affected. So they were able to move to retail sector or domestic help or to agriculture. That kind of movement is not possible now from, let's say, the retail sector or tourism sector or domestic service sector. Now the sectors that are doing well are health and IT, but these sectors require prior training. This is just to say that in many ways, the crisis is impacting mobility of people, and a lot of migrant workers are disproportionately affected, and they are stranded. They cannot go back home. They cannot move to other sectors. So in terms of policy, what is needed now is, first of all, the fall in remittances cannot be avoided. But governments can attempt to mitigate the impacts. And in terms of addressing issues of migrants, taking care of stranded migrants is a priority. Cash transfer and healthcare programs that governments have come up with, both in the host communities as well as in the sort of origin communities for migrants, those policies, cash transfer programs, healthcare programs should be inclusive of migrant workers, especially in cities that host large number of migrants. Taking care of returning migrants is also a priority in many communities. And a couple of points about
conclude, please. We need to, if it's okay, because you're both over 7 minutes. If you can conclude, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Right. So just to conclude, I think there is a great need for improving data, and in particular, high frequency data, and implementing all the things related to migration requires a coherent and effective framework. Thank you.
Thank you, Dilip. I would now request Ashish from FATF to come in and talk about some of the key enabling environment aspects related to the customer due diligence and eKYC. Ashish?
Thank you, Harish.
You have 5 minutes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Harish, and good morning and good afternoon, everyone. We all know that remittance sector has been facing the de-risking pressure for some time now due to a number of drivers, and the pandemic seems to have exacerbated the crisis. How to keep the business and remittance flows up and running in these unprecedented times is a challenge for policymakers and the service providers. Now, where does the Financial Action Task Force figure in this debate on creating an enabling environment? As many of you may know, the Financial Action Task Force is the international standard setter to combat money laundering and financing of terrorism and proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. But we also do a lot more than just standard setting. We hold countries accountable by assessing them on implementation of our standards. We release guidance and best practices to help countries and the private sector implementation. And we ensure collaboration with the global network for a consistent application of our standards in more than 200 countries, 204 as per the last count. The FATF standards are the same for all countries, but the standards require countries in the private sector to take a risk-based approach. This means the application of the standards, for example, due diligence checks and ongoing monitoring, the extent and the intensity and the timeliness of these measures and monitoring can vary across and within countries in accordance with the level of risk posed by a product or customer. I think this is a vital part of the response to the current situation, which has been rightly pointed out in the interim report just released. How to ensure that a wrong interpretation and rigid implementation do not come in the way of government stimulus package, economic relief, or other measures in these moments of crisis. I think there are three elements where there's a flexibility which has been rightly sort of identified in the report, as well as which are sort of provided within the FATF standards, and which can be considered by the public and private sector, both in the short and long term. The first element is the flexibility provided under the standards to allow simplified customer due diligence, where the money laundering or terrorist financing risks are low. I think there's scope for national authorities to have a close look at this issue, engage with the sector, have a joint approach and issue regulatory guidance so that there's a greater understanding of circumstances under which financial institutions, including remittance providers, can use simplified due diligence measures where warranted. The second element of the package is the timing of verification of identity of customers. Generally, FATF standards require financial institutions to identify and verify the identity of their customers before or during the course of establishing business relationships. However, the standards also contain flexibility to allow for a delayed verification if, for example, this occurs as soon as practicable, or this is essential not to disrupt the normal course of business, or MLTF risks are sort of effectively managed. So what I'm trying to say is that within the standards, there's a sufficient flexibility, allowed both to the public and private sector to tailor-made their, to sort of, adjust their policies and sort of respond to the crisis, so that, the business is not interrupted or, risks are appropriately mitigated. And there's a scope for regulators to spend some time on looking at those areas. The third element of the package is the use of technology, such as digital solutions to onboard customers. It's quite timely that the FATF released guidance on digital identity in February this year, as the crisis was unfolding in many parts of the world. The guidance highlights that reliable digital ID can make it easier, cheaper, and more secure to identify customers in the financial sector. And it also clarifies, and I think this is an important clarification because this was something which was missing in many other debates on this issue, that non-face-to-face customers that are identified using reliable and independent digital ID systems may in fact pose standard level of risk or even low risks, in some cases. And that is something which needs to be considered by regulators and supervisors as well as the private sector. The FATF released a public statement on the 1st of April and a more detailed report at the beginning of May in response to the COVID-19 crisis to support policy interventions in these areas. And not so long ago in 2017, we issued financial inclusion guidance, which contains real life examples of more than 40 countries and international organizations on how some countries are using the flexibility provided within the standards to ensure access to financial services. So probably there's a time to, now is the time to look back at the guidance and see, how countries can sort of adjust their policy responses in these moments of, crisis. So in conclusion, I think the crisis is just definitely a short-term challenge of huge proportions, but in the long term, it also provides an opportunity to look at issues from a fresh perspective and ensure that public and private sector are joined up in their approach and work together to sort of, frame their response to the crisis. Thanks, Harish, back to you.
Thank you, Ashish. I think the work on digital ID could not have come at a much more at an appropriate time, and that work is clearly very, very helpful. So let me now request Amadou from the African Institute of Remittances to share his perspectives. Amadou, over to you.
Thank you so much, Harish. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning and good afternoon to everybody. I would like to thank you, the IFAT, for the continued effort in supporting remittance families. Allow me also, because today it is the Remittance Family Day, allow me to express our support to all remittance families across the world. A majority of them, mainly migrants, have been and continue to be adversely affected by the ongoing COVID-19 crisis, as it was mentioned by Dilip earlier. Some of them have lost their lives, but also some of them have lost their job or unable to continue providing support needed by their families back home. And or it is of public knowledge, if I may use this term, that migrants through their remittance continue to lift many households out of poverty in Africa and across the world. It is also of public knowledge that the impact of remittances in receiving countries could be higher, much, much higher, if appropriate policies are put in place. Many stakeholders have been working tirelessly to ensure better impact of remittances. And if we had today to assess our action towards achieving this goal, one could just limit himself to a few key lessons drawn from the impact of the COVID-19 on migrants, on also the remittance industry and the remittance families. Indeed, there is a strong consensus among practitioners and among experts that the COVID-19 have shown the vulnerability of the current model and of remittance business, and also the need to urgently work toward ensuring an enabling environment for effective impact of remittances. And this is where I wanted to come on. And I would like to really recall here that the Remittance Community Task Force has done deep analysis of the current situation and has provided key realistic actions for implementation to foster resilience and effectiveness of remittances for all of them. But allow me just to focus on a few of them. And then it was also highlighted by Harish in his introduction. It is among all the recommendations, I would like, it appears for us that, and probably it would be the same for many, that what is more critical for Africa, one critical issue for Africa, it is about facilitating a shift to digital channels. It is clearly mentioned in the report, and it's a very strong call for really facilitation of a shift in the digital remittance channels. We think it should be a priority for regulators, policymakers, and all stakeholders to ensure that necessary actions are taken and implemented to make this happen. This would mean revisiting the regulation and bringing appropriate regulation changes. It means also building effective identification systems. And as it was mentioned earlier by Kumar in his presentation, the key issue it is about identification. But also it is something else. It is building reliable digital payment ecosystems. Some countries in Africa, like Kenya, or some regional communities like the ECOWAS, the Economic Community of the West African States, have made some key progress in this. And in Africa, they have made a significant progress in this area, but there are many countries that are lacking behind. And I think the key issue should be for all African countries to leverage on technology to promote digital payment, digital systems, so that we can really overcome and we can build the resilience of the remittance industry. This means also to have a very reliable identification system. And then I would like to salute here to welcome the flexibility that was introduced by FATF in terms of identifying the customers, in terms of onboarding them. Thank you so much. Probably we'll have to discuss further this issue during the presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amadou. Thank you for keeping to the time. Loretta from the Western Union, I would request you now to come in and share the perspectives of Western Union and also as a key player in the remittances market. Loretta, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Good morning and good afternoon. You will excuse me if I will keep my video off because of my poor network connection where I am today. So excuse me for that. So first of all, I wanted to thank you for the opportunity to join you today and to take part of the panel and a very interesting discussion. And also happy International Remittances Families Day. So as I already, it was already said today on several occasions that the continuity of remittances services has been impacted by the crisis. And I will try to stick to my allocated time and maybe to speak more from the general industry perspective about the issues and challenges that we're facing. So money flows across the world are more vital than ever, so to sustain local economies, even in this new and unprecedented situation, presenting new challenges. Remittances services providers ensure that the public has access to funds, by this means providing essential financial services to a broad range of customers, including providing cash to those who do not hold bank accounts. COVID-19 pandemic has required quick actions by public authorities. The majority of governments initially declared certain businesses essential. During the lockdown, many of non-banks, remittance service providers, especially in sending countries, have not been considered as essential by local governments. In several countries, money transfer operators were not designated as essential, and especially agents. In many cases, agents do not exactly fit to the definition of essential businesses. And that caused the situations where local, for example, law enforcement authorities had to close agent operations during the lockdown period. Even in countries where agents have been recognized as essential services, misinformation at a certain level and local level have had impact on business continuity. However, and it was also said by the previous speakers, the remittances service providers have taken many proactive steps to ensure that service continues. With the closure of number of physical sending and receiving locations, COVID-19 has created, to a certain extent, almost the opportunity or open to certain doors to a greater use of digital financial services. So many remittances providers have quickly adapted to a new situation and changing the operating models, and were encouraged the customers to send money digitally from the comfort and safety of their homes. To help flatten the curve, money transfer operators are encouraging customers in affected areas to opt for digital transfers and by using internet sites and mobile apps. And in addition, to push off for those digital solutions, the money remittances providers during the lockdown period took also some other proactive measures, and I can cite here a few examples, like, for example, providing the guidance on social distancing and safety measures, and keeping customers informed of different availability services when the opening hours. Also offer a different type of offers and fee reductions for essential workers and reduced fee, or offer the free fee things. So just to conclude, so new products were introduced, for example, like insurance, home deliveries, or creation of digital locations. New digital services were built to help use electronic Know Your Customer to onboard clients, but also the agents. So maybe to conclude from my side, I could say that money transfer operators are open and continue to connect businesses and people, so the cash flow can continue during those challenging times as we have at the moment. And I can only reinforce the previous speaker's message that remittances services must remain available to their users despite any crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Loretta. Pedro, do we want to address any questions, or should we wrap up?
Actually, I think we had the floor. We had two requests from a representative from Bangladesh and then UAE, and I would then kindly ask if it's okay to bring their questions up.
Yes.
2 minutes each maximum. Otherwise, we will never make it on time. So I will invite our colleagues from Bangladesh, Deputy Representative, who wanted to take the floor.
Thank you.
I believe is Tariq Islam.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Can you hear me?
Low, if you could get closer to your microphone, maybe that will be a solution. Otherwise, we'll all try to
Can
increase.
you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. At the outset, I would like to thank the permanent missions of Guatemala, the Philippines, Moldova, and Madagascar for organizing this event. In the backdrop of the COVID-19 pandemic, there could not be a better time for this meeting. It provides us with an opportunity to show our collective political will to address the issue of remittance flow. Remittance is a lifeline for Bangladesh, as it is for many other migrant sending countries. And remittance emerged as an effective tool in our efforts to eradicate poverty and as an important catalyst for our development endeavors. We have been providing all support to our migrants and migrant workers. This year, in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, the Day of Family Remittance has assumed special significance. This is a difficult moment for migrant workers, as has been eloquently captured by my previous speakers. Joblessness is looming large. The World Bank has projected that the remittance may face 20 to 22% fall in low and lower middle income countries. This will definitely severely affect our economies, particularly our poverty reduction strategies. So we now need to find out an effective and sustainable solution to mitigate the fall in remittance flow and alleviate its impact on countries, societies, and households. And many of the speakers have alluded to that, and they have referred to some specific models or specific activities in this regard. Lowering the cost of transfer of remittance is crucial. Use of digital technologies could also be an important enabler. We also need to focus on utilizing the multilateral development framework, such as the SDGs, and implement the GCM, the GFMD, as well as various regional processes. We also need deeper engagement among the states and other stakeholders to address the existing challenges and gaps. We need to work towards providing a human and ethical face to labor migration management. And it was really, to conclude, I would like to say that the reflections of the speakers have been really useful in devising an effective policy, national strategy back in the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I will give now the floor to our representative from the UAE.
Thank you for giving me the floor. The comments I'll be providing more comments rather than questions, if I may. First, I'd like to thank the organizers for convening us today. According to the most recent World Bank estimates, migrants in the UAE are the source of approximately 8% of all remittances sent globally, totaling $44.4 billion, the second highest after the United States. Migrant workers in the UAE benefit from some of the lowest costs for sending remittances in the world, with costs averaging at 1.6%, significantly below the SDG target of 3%. The crucial role that remittances play in development is well known to you, of course, so I will not dwell on that. But I wanted to underline the UAE's deep concern that according to estimates, remittances could fall by up to $100 billion US dollars in 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic and associated economic challenges. Since the start of the pandemic, the UAE government has taken significant action to protect the lives and livelihoods of workers while also providing meaningful incentives to businesses to keep their workforces in place, in addition to strengthening protection measures for workers facing a loss of income. At the same time, UAE startups, often in cooperation with international and local banks, financial service providers, and insurance companies, have led the way in designing products that afford low-income migrant workers access to an array of financial products. The UAE stands ready to share its experience in this regard. Throughout the year 2020, the UAE is the chair of the Global Forum on Migration and Development, or GFMD, the primary platform for interstate discussion on migrant governance. A newly formed GFMD working group on the impact of COVID-19 on migrants, migration, and development is developing a work plan that addresses, among other concerns, the need to maintain the flow of remittances and the role they will play in recovery efforts. As the chair of GFMD, one of the UAE's 3 priorities is a renewed focus on the development of innovative partnerships, including with the private sector. To that end, this year's GFMD Migration Lab, an accelerator for the exchange of ideas among stakeholders on enhancing the development outcomes of migration, is focused on the creation and launch of concrete partnerships. A recent such partnership between IFAD and various other partners provide affordable insurance schemes that can be extended from workers in the UAE to their families back home. This is exactly the type of replicable partnership models that can be rolled out in other parts of the world where remittances play a significant role in development. We will be sharing our experiences based on our work with IFAD on this partnership at the GFMD Summit to be held in the UAE in January 2021. And thank you, and happy International Day of Family Remittances to you all, and apologies for taking a bit too long.
Thank you so much, Mohamed Batiski, for this. Arish, if I may, then maybe we're going to leave also the question for some time for questions and answer at the end. We just want to make sure that we have the panelists being able to address the floor. So if you allow me, Arish, I would like to transition to the next panel. Is that okay?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Pedro, and thank you to the organizers. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We know we have already also Sri Lanka that wanted to take the floor, so I will just ask kindly if it's okay to wait for the next set of questions and answer. And thank you for the UAE on this. And I will invite everybody also to see a nice video that was made from one of the projects on the UAE and migrants and insurance. We will provide the link. But without further ado, I would like to go to the digitalization of remittances towards the full coverage of the last mile. Moderating this panel, we have Antonia Esser. She's Engagement Manager, Center for Financial Regulation and Inclusion, just known as SEMFRI. So Antonia, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Pedro. Thank you so much to IFAD. Welcome to this session on digitalization of remittances. Happy Day of Family Remittances to all, and especially to the hardworking migrants supporting their families and communities in these trying times. I'm joined today by 4 panelists. One, we have Killian Clifford, who is the Policy and Advocacy Director at GSMA Mobile Money. GSMA is a vital industry organization for mobile network operators worldwide. Michael Kent is the executive chairman and founder of Azimo, an online remittance service that enables the transfers of funds to over 200 countries worldwide. We also have Lee Brenner, who is the public policy and communications leader at Novi, which is previously known as Calibra. Novi is a digital wallet from Facebook that will operate on the Libra payment system and aims to enable people to send digital funds around the world. Last but not least, we have Leon Isaacs, the CEO of Developing Market Associates Global, a development consultancy conducting research in remittances in developing markets and beyond. Welcome all. Building resilience in times of crisis is the motto of this event, and what a crisis this is. Millions of people across the globe are threatened to be pushed into extreme poverty due to the COVID-19 crisis. In this slide, we want to discuss digitalization and digital ecosystems in supporting remittance families and communities today. The use of technology along the remittance value chain has seen immense success and uptake in the last 10 years, and advancements have been rapid, really great success. The widespread adoption of mobile phones across the globe not only enable migrants and their families to be closer together, but also enables new business models that significantly reduce the cost of remittances and have done so in many corridors. Especially over the past few months, digital remittance transactions have skyrocketed in many corridors due to the pandemic and have kept remittances flowing. But digital remittances don't yet reach everyone. Cash in especially most developing countries remains the undisputed king among remittance recipients. considerable barriers exist in many cross-border corridors that prevent more providers and remitters to go digital. I want to start with Killian. From a mobile network perspective, what are the most crucial changes in your view that are still needed to unlock more digitization and keep this digitalization momentum going that the pandemic has created? Killian, over to you.
Thank you, Antonia, and everyone else who's managed to join the call today. Can I say what a privilege it is to speak again on behalf of the GSMA and the mobile money industry at this observant event for the International Day of Family and Remittances. And in particular, to speak on this topic of digitalization, which of course is very relevant as we look to build resilience in a time of crisis for 1 billion migrants and their families. So when we were speaking, Antonia, yesterday, you asked me whether this might be an M-Pesa moment for the remittance industry. Well, I think it certainly could be. We're seeing increased interest in digitizing remittances. The mobile money industry itself reached a landmark figure of 1 billion registered accounts last year. And our data shows that mobile money enabled remittances grew by a third through the course of last year to stand at 7.2 billion. But that figure, of course, was reached before the pandemic hit. And through the pandemic, we have seen an accelerated push to digitization over the course of the past few months through the combined actions of both the mobile industry and the regulators themselves. So this might go to answering some of your question, Antonia's, what measures have we seen or what needs to be addressed? We've seen temporary emergency measures being implemented, such as the waiving of transaction fees for certain tiers, the expansion of wallet limits, the relaxing of KYC requirements for low value accounts and others. And at the same time, the industry has worked with its agent networks to ensure that the liquidity has been maintained through the crisis and has been assisting them with issues around hygiene and social distancing practices, amongst others. So the result that we have seen is a push to digitization and is an increase in transaction volumes and values, particularly most especially we're seeing it in domestic mobile money across many of the countries that we cover. And on top of that, we were seeing increased interest from humanitarian organizations and governments alike who are looking to digitize cash transfers through this emergency. So certainly, despite the human tragedy of the last few months of the pandemic, it has been a catalyst for change for digitization, which is an active member of the Remittance Community Task Force put together by IFAD and as led by Pedro over these past few weeks. And which has looked to keep remittances flowing through the crisis. So an interim set of recommendations have been issued today, as you've heard about, and you'll find them on the Family Remittances website. And these mirror our own set of recommendations to policymakers that are issued back in April, which looks to crystallize on the positive developments we've seen in digitization through the crisis, while at the same time ensuring the sustainability of those measures on businesses. So the mobile money industry continues to build the digital use cases necessary to ensure that mobile money that's received digitally can also be onward spent digitally, whether it's bill payments, merchant payments, or accessing other financial services. But we know we're only at the beginning of that journey, and that digital ecosystem will be slower to reach certain parts of society, such as rural areas and the rural poor, who are, of course, the big focus of IFAD's work. So it's important through this early stage of digitization that we maintain a duality of systems, where digital remittances can also be de-digitized, i.e. they can be converted into cash, which is what mobile money offers with 8 million agents across 90 different countries. So through the crisis, mobile money industry remains resolutely committed to delivering upon Objective 20 of the Global Compact on Migration to bring faster, safer and cheaper remittances to migrants and their families. The cost of sending mobile money enabled remittances remains below that 10% threshold of 3%. We look forward to work with the task force members to ensure that the digitization of remittances continues to help build resilience in this time of crisis. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Killian. Next, I would like to call on Michael from a digital money transfer organization perspective. Can you share your insights on digitization and specifically, again, on sort of the most pressing challenges that you see that are preventing or that could assist in the unlocking of more, a deeper move towards digitalization, especially at the receiving end? Over to you, Michael.
Antonio, and yeah, honoured to be invited to share today with you. I think we do need to remember all the billion people who rely on either sending or receiving money, and it's just great. These people are heroes. They're particularly heroes at the moment, given some of the roles that they're working in, really on the front line of this pandemic. And it's great to be able to share this day. You know, I remember when it was suggested in 2013 to see it become a UN day and celebrated all over the world. There's so many of the private sector companies and the NGOs getting involved is really great. I think this is one of the great things that fintech is really designed to tackle. We've been singing a gospel of digitization of remittances for the last 10 years since really ASIMO was set up. And it's great to see more and more people getting on board with the belief that this is the transformational technology that the people who are using these financial services deserve. You know, it's very easy to send money cheaply across the world if you're wealthy and you have a good high net worth relationship with your bank. It's much harder if you're operating in the cash economy and perhaps don't have the range of other financial services that can be cross-sold to customers. So technology can solve that, which is fantastic. I think the thing I would say is there's reasons for being hopeful, and I think you touched on those. You know, when I first started this business, it was a couple of $100 for a smartphone, and there weren't that many connections in emerging markets. People were still arguing over, you know, whether or not remittances would go digital. That's not the case anymore. And I think, you know, all of the policymakers on this call, all of the large technology organizations, all of the card schemes are talking about how do we get the next billion customers in emerging markets digital. And I think actually the private market will solve a lot of these questions. If people are interested in doing it and they think they can generate a return, you're going to see more and more new entrants into the sector. So I think you're already seeing, at the moment, we launched recently a service to Nigeria, which allows the transfer of money from London to Lagos directly into a bank account there in less than 3 or 4 seconds. You know, it's faster to send money to an emerging market like Nigeria or the Philippines and have it settle into somebody's mobile wallet or account than it is to somewhere like America or some of the European countries. So there is this huge promise of technology that's getting built in the emerging markets. And as more and more of those countries come on stream, I think it's going to make a big difference. You asked me about, so I think there are many reasons to be hopeful. Obviously, I don't want to focus on the challenges, but there are some. I think domestic infrastructure still has a long way to go. The clearing networks in certain emerging markets are legacy technology. They need upgrading, and there is a significant amount of investment required to do that. I know that more and more companies are trying to tackle that problem, but there's still a long way to go, and it can be very complicated to settle funds digitally into a lot of countries. Building software is very hard, and I think there is a responsibility for those of us who are, you know, running technology businesses, from the very big ones that Lee works for to the very small ones like ASIMO, to try and share as much of our learning with people who are trying to build that infrastructure in emerging markets. You know, software is hard. It's not impossible. People are very good at doing it in certain parts of the world, and we need to really export that expertise and know-how. I think there's a lot of regulatory uncertainty still in certain markets. M-Pesa has been a great success story, but in certain sub-Saharan African markets, it's still very hard to get the regulatory clearance that is required to operate a digital money transfer service, both on the receive and the send side. So I think there's a lot of regulatory arbitrage, people not really understanding what the regulations are. The regulator being behind the curve when it comes to fintech and what's possible with it is a big one. And then, of course, people talk about de-risking by banks. And I think that's actually something that is changing now. That, you know, you see companies like Facebook or companies like Google really getting into cross-border payments. The banks are starting to think that this might be a more interesting area, but probably for a good 5 or 6 years over the past decade, you've had money transfer operators really losing their basic bank account infrastructure, and that's been tough for people, because if you can't sit on top of the banking layer, it's very hard to build these digital services. So I think there are challenges. I think today is about good news, and the news is that, you know, you've got amazing entrepreneurs, WorldRemit, Remitly, Zoom, the original guys doing this, who are trying to tackle this problem, really pushing hard on it. And the prices will come down, the competition will make sure that's the case. And, you know, the smartphone ubiquity will mean that we get there. But there are still challenges for sure.
Thank you so much, Michael. Very valid points, especially on the national payments infrastructure and the need for exchange of information between technology partners and remittance providers, like you say. You mentioned Facebook, so this is a great transition over to Lee from Novi. So Novi is a new entrant into this remittances game. How have you found your journey, and what would you like to see, or what have been the harder hurdles to overcome in this cross-border remittances space?
Well, first, thank you. It is an honor to be part of the day and part of the remittance task force. So Novi is a digital wallet, as you mentioned, from Facebook that is going to operate. So it isn't currently operating, but it's going to operate on the blockchain-based Libra payment system. So our journey has obviously been public, and we've been doing it for just over about a year, working with regulators around the world to make sure that we are doing it in a way that gets it all right and make sure that we're compliant and doing it in a safe way. But what Novi will allow is really focused on making sure that people can use their local currency to buy the Libra digital currency and use Novi to instantaneously send money around the world securely, as I mentioned, and really with no hidden fees. I think that's, we all know how long it can take and the fees that come along with this. So when people are then able to, as Michael was just talking to, still be able to convert their local currency back from the Libra currency and cash in and cash out points around the world, you'll be able to access Novi as a standalone app, as well as through WhatsApp and Messenger. Again, done, as Michael was talking about, through a basic smartphone, which is coming down in cost every day. And really the goal for us is to make it as easy as sending a message. We've seen how digitalization in other sectors has really made that ability to send a message as easy and instantaneous as everyone knows. But really from the inception, Novi has been committed to helping improve the way money is being sent and received overseas. And that's why we're really directly supporting the task force digitization's efforts. And we're working to create this really an alternative ecosystem for remittances as a way to reduce the costs and inefficiencies of moving money that people see now. And we know that the COVID-19 pandemic has only accelerated the need for this transition. It's accelerated the conversation about this transition, in essence, this conversation today that we're having, but really governments around the world are really starting to pay attention to it. But particularly as health concerns and lockdowns are keeping more people at home, we've learned that 29% of people say they are now using digital services to send money more often than they did before the COVID-19 pandemic. And this is likely only going to increase. And that's why really from our perspective, our mission at Novi is to make money work better for everyone. We're committed to improving remittances, especially those around the world that are marginalized, that don't have access to the current financial system and these basic services, as much as some of those who have high net worth or are able to have access to these financial services through their bank accounts. We think it's really very similar to, it's analogous to basically if I was using an email system and I could only send email to one person that was using that email system in the same way. We think that's basically the way it is, even with digital networks now. We think it's important, and that's why we're building something with other Libra members to make sure that it's interoperable, that's something that people can use, whether using the Novi wallet or another wallet that's built on the Libra ecosystem anywhere in the world, you'd be able to send money to each other. And they think that's really important, which will help, one, decrease fees, it increases access for people around the world. And we think that really it aligns with the UN's vision to move money with the same ease as communications tools, which again, Facebook has done an amazing job at really allowing people to connect around the world. And I think that's why we're really committed to making sure that we're working together with large companies, small companies, nonprofits, social impact partners, as well as multilateral organizations like the UN, to make sure that we really do make remittances, faster, easier, and more affordable for people all over the world.
Thank you so much, Lee. That is a great points. And I guess one important point that is emerging here is, and what previous sessions have also touched on, is the importance of a digital identity and using different identity proxies such as email addresses, social media profiles to enable creating identities for those that currently cannot access digital remittances. Lastly, I want to call on Leon. Leon, you have been conducting research around the digitalization journey of consumers, both at the sending and the receiving side for many years. In your view, will digitalization be the answer to building more resilience in the recovery of this humanitarian crisis via remittances? Over to you, Leon.
Great. Thanks, Antonia, and happy International Day of Family Remittances to everyone. It's actually great to be talking here. It's always challenging to go right at the end, but I think the short answer to your question is yes, there's every potential. And I think, as we've been saying for a long time, in reality, if we're going to hit our longer term SDG goals and so on, the only real way to do that is going to be through full digitization. I think, though, that whilst that sounds like a very positive answer, there are a lot of hurdles that we do need to overcome to get there. And I think one of the things we need to bear in mind is that when we talk about digital right now, if we hear, say, what Michael was saying, he is talking generally about a full digital end-to-end process. A lot of the numbers that are being given out by other companies about digital at the moment is probably only having digital at one end of the process, which means there's a lot of manual intervention still, and that's what's keeping the costs high. So what we need to do is actually turn the 20 or 30% of people that are currently operating through digital, let's say digital services, into full end-to-end digital for 100% of the people. So in a way, the crisis is acting as a very strong catalyst to create awareness, to create interest from bodies that can actually provide solutions, whether it's financial solutions, technical solutions, and so on. But I think what we need to do is to look at this as a starting point to see where can we take this, make sure we're looking at this with the long-term goals in sight. So whilst we take short-term responsive actions, they're in the light of the longer term consequence. Some of the things we really have to address are actually not so much technological, they're actually educational. And I think one or two times we've heard about literacy and financial education, but I think we shouldn't underestimate it. When we look at the reason why people, even if they have digital tools or solutions available to transfer money, why they don't use it, a lot of it is to do, some of it's to do with awareness. A lot is to do with trust or mistrust, sometimes of the institutions, but actually much more about doing anything that involves the internet or something technological. They're also worried about potential scams, losing their money and so on. There's a lot of simple measures that could be taken by working together between the remittance service providers, governments and diaspora groups to try and get the right level of education and reassurance to people that here's what you look for to know that this is a safe service, here's how it works, and here's really why you should use it. And whilst the price saving is an element, actually a lot of the convenience factors are probably much more important, for many of these people. So I think for me, we've begun a journey. I think we've had a big boost to that journey. The key is to actually make digital available everywhere. And that doesn't just mean about all the great entrepreneurs and new services. That's about basic infrastructure. And some of these areas, if we don't have basic infrastructure, particularly in the rural areas or the areas where the poorest live, we're going to continually not meet our goals, or it'll be very expensive to do so. So I think we need a holistic approach. Digital is the future, but we're all going to have to work in different ways together to keep that focus and to make sure that happens. And I should probably stop there in the interest of everybody's time today. So thank you.
Thank you to all. Over to you, Pedro. I guess the main message here, digitalization is the future, but the right enabling environment has to be created, like Leon said, holistically, and like Killian said, as well without foregoing cash completely. Cash remains a vital component of the remittance value chain, and many people cannot digitize at this stage. So let's make it a dual system and work on the enabling environment and linking digital remittances to the real economy and real financial services so they can continue supporting migrants and their families. Over to you, Pedro, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Antonia. You couldn't have said it better. You should be an ambassador for IFAD. That's so really. I think the message is perfect. The reality needs to be addressed. I know we're running 20 minutes behind time, so we don't want to retain too many so many people for so long. So I would like is at least to provide now the opportunity for one request from Sri Lanka to take the floor, which will be followed by closing remarks previously recorded by our president, and then just a few words from me, and then we will end this meeting. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to the representative of Sri Lanka. Please, you have 2 minutes. I hope you're there. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the floor. And Sri Lanka thanks the permanent missions of Guatemala, Madagascar, and the Philippines, and the IFAD for organizing this high-level webinar on the observance of the International Day for Family Remittances. A significant part of Sri Lanka's economy has been depending on remittances. However, it has been projected that the remittances to Sri Lanka will fall by 19% in 2020. In 2019, Sri Lanka had received over $6 billion as remittances, which could cover 84% of its trade deficit. As it was tabled during this discussion, digitization of remittances will be the future. So I have a question. In considering the available and the potential digital ecosystems for this purpose, what digital tools are or will be available for determining the least costly corridors for remittances to LMICs, and how to ensure that such means complement the domestic financial regulations and thereby avoid illicit financial flows into these countries? Thank you.
I will let the two moderators from the last two sessions, if they want to assign a responder for that, or Antonia or Arish. From anybody?
Pedro, can you please repeat the question? It was not very clear to me.
I believe there's a magic answer that we would have to have that unfortunately I believe we don't have, but I think the question was in relation to if there's a specific steps that should be done now in relation to the future of digital remittances that will not only bring it down, but will ensure a development in the ecosystem that is in line with the AML CTF, for instance, standards that are used. So I believe that it's a lot with the recommendations that we all worked over the last month. So more on this, on digitalization and how the enabling environment will follow through.
Right. So thank you, Pedro, and thanks to the colleague from Sri Lanka for raising the question. So to some extent, I think the whole purpose of this community task force is to address that question. And the interim report goes to some length on that, and of course we'll elaborate. But I think maybe just to highlight a couple of points, I think in Sri Lanka there are a lot of advantages because of the current state of the payment system development. It's fairly advanced in Sri Lanka, so I think that is a good starting point to build on. And I think the focus really has to be to look at the kind of the market entry barriers for new models of remittance services and how to integrate them into the national payment infrastructure in Sri Lanka. And I think that will really help in promoting more digital means of making remittances. And of course, this answer would vary from country to country, but the specific case of Sri Lanka, I think that would be the one which is most critical. I'm of course happy to elaborate on this bilaterally or in a different forum. Thank you.
Yes, and if I may add, I guess another important consideration here is also the implementation of the risk-based approach to not overburden those that do not pose significant risk to the financial sector, and especially lower income consumers that are transacting on the $100 per transaction and kind of slapping them with overly restrictive due diligence requirements and KYC requirements. But yes, as Harish said, there are many steps to this, which you can find in the Remittance Task Force document that we have published and will publish in more detail later in the month. But that is definitely one big contributing factor. Thank you.
Absolutely, Antonia. Thank you so much for that. The whole idea, I think, of all the efforts that these 38 organizations have made is to guide us better, also to individually then address some of these issues. As I mentioned from the beginning, at IFAD, actually we launched the 4Rs program, the Remittance, Response, Resilience, and Recovery, to try to adapt to the knowledge that has been created by this task force on our ongoing and future programs. And I think every institution is doing this. So on digitalization, I think we all need to get to bear on this. Thank you so much. I would like is to ask my colleagues if we could put the final message for today from the president of IFAD. My apologies for the delay. It will just be a couple of minutes. Our president, unfortunately, was not able to participate today because we had a replenishment that has also been pushed from due to the COVID. So our apologies for this. However, he insisted in providing this message to all our listeners today. So please.
On this International Day of Family Remittances, we invite you to join IFAD in recognizing the hard work and courage of migrants and their families. There are 200 million migrants around the world, supporting more than 800 million family members back home. On June 16th each year, the international community recognizes them. Today, their resilience is being tested by a pandemic that has struck the entire globe. COVID-19 has hit migrant workers very hard. It has exposed them to job loss and health risks, and it threatens the economic lifeline to their families back home. Migrant workers and their families have few safety nets. No work means no remittances. This year, remittances are expected to drop 20%. As a result, tens of millions of families may fall into extreme poverty. Each payment of $200 or $300 represents the hard work and compassion of migrants for families at home. Collectively, these payments add up to more than $500 billion a year, with at least $250 billion going to rural areas alone. These contributions have, since the mid-90s, outstripped all official development assistance combined. IFAD works with rural families to build a better future by creating bridges between inclusive financial services and remittances, which help alleviate hunger and poverty. The International Day of Family Remittances is an opportunity for the global community to commit to practical actions to sustain migrants and their families and build resilience to future shocks. In these difficult times, IFAD has brought together partners across sectors to identify key priorities. We call upon governments to declare that remittance service providers are essential services, and we ask them to implement policies that foster competition and innovation in the remittance market. We call on the private sector to use technology and digital services to reduce the costs of sending money home and improve the speed and security. And we call on civil society to support programs in financial education, to help migrants save and invest, build resilience, and create new opportunities back home for themselves and their communities. Let us today recognize the efforts of all the women and men who work so hard and make sacrifices to send money home. And let us commit to doing our part to make sure that this hard-earned money results in more resilience and a brighter future for rural communities.
Thank you, colleagues. I appreciate so much your staying here until now. On behalf of the president and of IFAD, we want to thank you again for having given us the honors to host this year events. Also with a big thanks from our counterparts, the member states, Guatemala, the Philippines, the United Kingdom, Moldova, and of course Madagascar. You know that this actually was one of the first virtual events of the Global Forum on Remittances, Investment and Development. That one unfortunately was not able to take place this year in Kenya, but it's been postponed to next year. So we hope that the situation will allow us to gather all again on the same date a year from now in Nairobi for the Global Forum on Remittances and Development. And in the meantime, we will continue with the IDFR ID, with the virtual version, and address and dig deeper in the issues that you've heard today and the specific panels. So again, we want to thank you so much for participating, and please hashtag family remittances for the campaign of the International Day of Family Remittances and recognizing all migrants and their families on this day. Thank you so much, everybody.